For more than a century, one empire stretched so widely across the globe that people said the sun never set on it. Somewhere, at any hour, daylight touched a territory ruled or administered by Britain. At its height, the British Empire covered roughly a quarter of Earth's land surface and governed hundreds of millions of people. It included colonies, dominions, protectorates, mandates, trading ports, naval bases, and territories with very different legal relationships to London. But the empire was not built all at once, and it was never a single simple machine. It grew through commerce, war, settlement, diplomacy, coercion, and sea power. Its story is not only about British ambition, but also about the people and societies it transformed, exploited, connected, and resisted. The empire's beginnings were modest compared with its later scale. In the late 1500s and early 1600s, England was not the dominant European colonial power. Spain and Portugal had already carved out vast overseas empires after the Age of Discovery, controlling lucrative routes, mines, plantations, and ports. England, along with France and the Netherlands, entered this global competition later. Early English expansion focused on overseas possessions, trading posts, privateering, and settlements in the Americas and Asia. Scotland also attempted colonization in the 1600s, most famously with the failed Darien scheme in Central America. These efforts showed a growing belief that national power depended not only on land in Europe, but on ships, trade, and access to global wealth. Trade companies became one of Britain's most important imperial tools. Chartered companies were private businesses granted special rights by the state, often including monopoly privileges and the authority to make treaties, build forts, and wage war. The most famous was the East India Company, founded to pursue trade in Asia. At first, companies like this were interested mainly in profit, spices, textiles, tea, and access to Asian markets. But commerce and conquest became closely linked. Trading posts required protection, protection required soldiers and ships, and commercial rivalries became political rivalries. Over time, especially in India, a company that began as a merchant enterprise developed into a territorial power governing millions of people. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Britain fought repeated wars with the Netherlands and France. These conflicts were not just European disputes, they were global struggles over colonies, ports, trade routes, and naval dominance. In North America, Britain gained the upper hand against France, especially after conflicts that weakened French power on the continent. British colonies along the Atlantic coast grew rapidly, supported by settlement, trade, and forced labor systems across the wider Atlantic world. At the same time, Britain retained valuable Caribbean colonies, where plantation economies generated enormous wealth through enslaved labor. By the mid-1700s, Britain was emerging as a dominant colonial force in North America and the Caribbean, with its navy becoming central to imperial control. A turning point came in India. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, the East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal, with the help of local alliances and political divisions. This victory gave the company immense influence over Bengal, one of the richest regions of the Mughal world. Bengal's revenues helped fund further expansion, turning the company from a commercial actor into a governing power. British dominance in India did not happen overnight, it expanded through warfare, alliances, annexations, and administrative change. By 1818, after the defeat of the Maratha Empire in the Third Anglo-Maratha War, Britain had overcome the last major imperial rival in India. India became the empire's most valuable possession, central to British wealth, strategy, and prestige. But Britain's empire also suffered a major rupture. The American Revolution ended with Britain losing some of its oldest and most populous colonies in North America. By 1783, the loss was a shock. 13 colonies had broken away and formed the United States. Yet the empire did not collapse. Britain still controlled British North America, which would later form Canada, as well as Caribbean territories and many strategic maritime positions. More importantly, imperial attention shifted. Instead of focusing primarily on the Atlantic colonies that had rebelled, British expansion increasingly turned toward Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. The loss of America reshaped the empire, pushing it toward a more global, naval, and trade-centered form of power. After the defeat of Napoleonic France in 1815, Britain entered the 19th century as the world's leading naval and imperial power. This period later became known as Pax Britannica, or British Peace, not because the world was peaceful, but because British sea power helped shape global trade and diplomacy. The Royal Navy protected shipping routes, suppressed rival threats, and enforced British interests overseas. Britain pursued trade concessions in China and Japan, expanded influence in Southeast Asia, and competed with Russia in Central Asia in what became known as the Great Game. In Africa, European competition accelerated into the scramble for Africa, with Britain claiming vast territories. British power was formal in some places and indirect in others, but its reach was global. The British Empire was not only a collection of colored territories on a map. It was also an economic system. Britain dominated much of world trade and controlled key oceans, ports, and shipping lanes. This allowed it to influence regions even where it did not rule directly. In parts of Asia and Latin America, British capital, merchants, banks, and naval pressure shaped local economies. The empire extracted raw materials, opened markets for manufactured goods, and moved labor across vast distances, sometimes voluntarily and often under coercive or unequal conditions. Railways, telegraphs, legal systems, and administrative structures connected imperial spaces, but these connections served British strategic and commercial priorities. The empire helped create a global economy, while also deepening inequalities within it. Inside the empire, not all territories were governed the same way. Some were crown colonies ruled more directly by British officials. Others were protectorates where local rulers remained in place under British supervision. White settler colonies such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and later South Africa gained increasing self-government. By the 1920s, several were formally recognized as dominions, meaning they had substantial autonomy while still connected to the British Crown. This flexibility helped the empire endure, but it also revealed racial hierarchies at its core. Settler colonies received political freedoms that were denied to many colonized peoples in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. The empire spoke the language of law and order, yet its rights and representation were deeply unequal. At its peak in the early 20th century, the British Empire reached astonishing proportions. By 1913, it held sway over about 412 million people, around 23% of the world's population at the time. By 1920, after gains connected to the First World War, it covered about 35.5 million square kilometers, roughly 24% of the planet's land area. But the same era also exposed weakness. Germany and the United States challenged Britain's economic lead. Industrial competition, naval rivalry, and imperial tensions contributed to the atmosphere that led to the First World War. Britain relied heavily on its empire for soldiers, resources, and money. The empire emerged larger on the map, but Britain itself was financially and militarily strained. The Second World War accelerated the empire's decline. Britain and its allies ultimately won, but victory came at enormous cost. In East and Southeast Asia, Japan occupied British colonies, shattering the image of European invincibility. The war drained Britain's economy and forced it to depend heavily on allies, especially the United States. At the same time, anti-colonial movements had grown stronger. Millions of colonial subjects had contributed to the war effort, and many demanded freedom rather than a return to imperial rule. India, the empire's most populous and valuable possession, became independent in 1947, partitioned into India and Pakistan amid massive violence and displacement. Indian independence was not just one loss, it signaled that the age of empire was ending. Decolonization continued across Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. Some transitions were negotiated, others involved conflict, repression, and long struggles for independence. The Suez Crisis of 1956 confirmed Britain's reduced status. When Britain, France, and Israel intervened in Egypt after the nationalization of the Suez Canal, pressure from the United States, the Soviet Union, and world opinion forced a withdrawal. It was a clear sign that Britain could no longer act as an independent superpower. The symbolic endpoint came in 1997, when Hong Kong was handed over to China. 14 overseas territories remain under British sovereignty, and many former colonies belong to the Commonwealth of Nations. The British Empire's legacy survives in borders, law, language, institutions, migration, conflict, and memory. Its history is therefore not only about the rise and fall of power, but about the modern world it helped shape. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.